Kenya's opposition leader drops out of the race for president. Raila Odinga says the poll won't be fair, but will his boycott make a difference? I'm Imran Gata, and today's Newsmaker is Kenya's presidential election. It was supposed to be a do-over of Kenyan democracy. President Uhuru Kenyatta's re-election in August faced so many allegations of fraud that the Supreme Court annulled the results. A new poll is set to take place later this month, but Kenya's top opposition leader has thrown the process into further turmoil. Raila Odinga announced the Electoral Commission hasn't taken the necessary steps to ensure a free and fair poll, and then dropped out of the two-man race. But will Odinga's withdrawal actually lead to any reforms, or has he handed his rival a second term? Natalie Pohonen reports.
For weeks, political divisions in Kenya have been on open display, as opposition supporters called for electoral reform ahead of the second presidential election this year. But Kenya is now heading into uncharted political waters, and it took less than 24 hours to get there. First, Kenyan opposition leader Raila Odinga formally withdrew from the race because he said the Election Commission had failed to make vital changes to ensure a free and fair election.
All indications are that the election scheduled for 26th of October will be worse than the previous one.
The incumbent, President Uhuru Kenyatta, then pledged to go ahead with the poll anyway.
So, my friend,
I hear now that you have withdrawn after taking us round and round, having spent more than 10 billion Kenya shillings so that we can go for an election. Money we could have built roads, money we could have used to build hospitals, now is being used for an election that he called for, but now he says he does not want. Is there justice there?
Parliament has also just passed an amendment that if one candidate withdraws from a repeat presidential election, the other candidate automatically wins. The president will have to sign it for the law to take effect. But in another twist, Kenya's High Court has directed the Election Commission to include a fringe candidate who previously ran, if there is a repeat election. That's Ekuru Okot, who won less than 1% of votes in the August elections. Kenya made history this year after the Supreme Court nullified the results of the August presidential election over irregularities. Will its people be in a position to shape the next chapter in the country's political future with an electoral process that's now in turmoil? Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Nairobi is Kimani Ichung'wah. He's a member of the Kenyan Parliament. Also from Nairobi is Farah Maalim. He's the former Deputy Speaker of the Kenyan National Parliament and an opposition party politician. And in London, we have Agnes Gitau. She's the director of GBS Africa, an advisory firm working to promote business and investment in the continent. Thank you all for joining us. Let me begin with you, Farah Maalim. Why is Raila Odinga boycotting this vote on October 26th?
Well, he believes that the systemic flaws or the systemic problems that the IEBC had in the last election have not been addressed yet. They were the minimum irreducible conditions that was advanced by Raila Odinga through NASA. And I think the period to address that was too short. I don't think that could have been addressed in 60 days because the Supreme Court found the IEBC having had illegalities and irregularities. But because they were not able to pinpoint specific officers or specific departments, and they said it is a systemic. When somebody tells you it's systemic, it means the whole system is flawed. Right. So the idea was to correct the system, and it cannot be corrected in the given period of time. And you can also follow the fact that within the IEBC, there has been a lot of internal conflicts when everybody was trying to blame everybody else. So he says the system has not been corrected, and he doesn't want to go for elections when the same system that was there before is what obtains today.
Right. So Kimani Ichung'wah, they're saying no reform, no elections, and they're pointing to the fact that they feel the electoral law amendments proposed by the ruling party have created deeper and wider divisions within the IEBC, the Electoral Council. They feel as if they're being set up to fail and that the second time round it's going to be rigged. What's your response to that?
I think far from what my good friend Farah Maalim says, they are not boycotting this election because of any systemic failures in the process or in the electoral system. Because those systemic failures are some of what is being sorted through the electoral amendments that we have proposed on the floor of Parliament. They are abandoning this election because they knew they were going to lose this election. From the beginning, even the August 8th election, they never wanted to go into elections. They tried through the court system, through our judicial system, by filing a myriad of court cases, almost about close to 100 cases that were filed in court, all to create hurdles towards the holding of a free, fair, and credible election on August 8th. They do know that they lost in that election. They do know also, as a matter of fact, that they will lose in the election that is slated for the 26th. And therefore, their running away is basically just trying to save themselves from the humiliating defeat they would have suffered. I think for those who have been observing what has been happening in the last 1 month or so, since the nullification of the results, we did say that we disagreed with the court's decision, but we respected that decision. We hit back to the campaign trail, continued selling our agenda to the people. What ODM and the NASA coalition did was to go back to their drawing board, and they realized they cannot in any way be able to claw back on the numbers, the difference in numbers that our coalition had in the last election. And therefore, they made a conscious decision to not to have these elections in an effort to try and force us into a negotiating table to negotiate themselves into government in an extra legal and an extra constitutional way.
Okay, Kimani, we got your perspective. Agnes Gitau, from your vantage point, which one of the two gentlemen is closer to the truth?
I'll be wrong to say who is right and who is wrong, but that's the situation in Kenya. Everybody is translating the latest move by Honorable Raila Odinga to how it suits them. So both parties, we have two camps. One saying, look, there is no need of running an election if the issues that were highlighted have not been rectified, and the other camp is saying, look, you know, we've spent a lot of money, it's costly to a very young economy like Kenya, why would you want to withdraw this last minute? So both camps have their own arguments, but I think the most important thing to note is, you know, Kenya is bigger than politicians. We need to ensure that politicians are very careful in their rhetoric, because the impact it has on both the domestic and international investment is huge. And suddenly the uncertainty we are currently experiencing is not good for the country. And I think the political class must start it's not negotiating to have the opposition in government. No, it's what is best for Kenya, and how do we sit down as mature people and resolve this to move the country forward.
Right. Farah, help me understand this. So you have the Supreme Court ruling in Odinga's favor. You have the entire international community in support of this as a great democratic exercise, the fact that the Supreme Court can come in, annul the election and call for a new election. So Odinga had the momentum with him. Can you honestly tell me that he thought that Kenyatta is going to rig this second round with the entire world watching?
You see, the entire world is not going to conduct the elections. You see, the elections, they are servers, they are election materials that were used to conduct the elections last time. It is those election materials and the people who were manning it that time, people who conducted the election, who were culpable for the mistakes that were highlighted by the Supreme Court. Now, when the Supreme Court says there are systemic flaws, illegalities and irregularities in the system itself, and then you ask these people, or you ask NASA to go back to the same elections 60 days later without correcting that mischief, the problem was there. You must correct the problem so that you can have a free, fair, credible and transparent elections. And that is where the crux of the matter is. I don't know who is going to win and who is going to lose. I mean, everybody would want to say their candidate is going to win or their candidate is not going to lose. But the issue is, if you're so confident that your candidate is going to win and he has the advantages of the incumbency, why not correct the system that was seen to be flawed? The process was flawed. The results were flawed. The product was flawed. Why do you then get scared of getting this system sorted out?
Okay, so Kimani,
that is the crux of the matter.
Let's pose that to Kimani. Let's pose it to Kimani. Why not make some tweaks? Why not meet them halfway and make some tweaks to the system so they can feel happy to participate in the process?
Let me say this, and you hear the dishonesty in Honorable Farah when he says that we have refused. We haven't refused. In fact, we are the only people who have taken steps within the legal and constitutional institutions created under our constitution, and that is Parliament and the Independent Electoral Commission, to sort out the systemic problems that are pointed out by the Supreme Court. Our friends on the other side, what they have done, they have not even addressed themselves to the systemic problems. They have narrowed down their problems to demanding the exit of particular officers of the Electoral Commission, particular commissioners who they think probably do not sing to their song, or those they feel that they probably may not be able to intimidate. They have demanded that we change the service providers, those who are printing the ballot papers, those who are providing the IT system that the electoral process in terms of identification and transmission of voter results is running on. And a myriad of other things that they knew practically were not possible to be done within the period given by the Supreme Court of 60 days. And let me be quick to point out, it is not a period that was just given by the Supreme Court. It is a constitutional requirement that a fresh election must be held within a period of 60 days. Therefore, what NASA have been trying to do is to create hurdles to make sure that we do not have an election before the 60th day, and therefore precipitate what they imagined will be a constitutional crisis. This afternoon, I can tell you, somebody has already gone to court asking, and is some of the people who support them in civil society, asking the court to declare, to form a caretaker government. And that is an agenda that the NASA coalition have been trying to push. Okay. Well, for us, we have been very systematic. We have insisted on following the rule of law and the Constitution as it is.
Okay, Kimani. So, Farah, do you want a caretaker government?
Look, the problem is very simple. If you have a contest and there's a referee, and one of the contestants is not confident, not comfortable with that referee, and sees the referee as being partisan, and the other side, which is the Chungwa side, is so confident that regardless of who comes in, even if there is a level playing field, they will win. Then it's only fair that you say, okay, you're not comfortable with this referee. How can we get a referee that we can both be comfortable with? And that's it. It's not rocket science. It's not such a big issue. And then you go back again and use your tyranny of numbers in Parliament to make it to make it so easier right now, legally, that they can do the same flawed thing, but this time it's not going to be flawed because there's a law that provides for it, and that says the manual counting system is going to supersede, is going to be superior to the digital one. I mean, this is the problem we have gone through this country for far too many years.
So hold on.
I can tell you
okay, so before you come in, Kimani, Agnes, let me ask you, as things stand, so we have Kenyatta saying, quote, if you do not want elections, step aside so that the country can move forward. So you have Kenyatta wanting to move forward, Odinga boycotting. We have this kind of deadlock before October 26th. It will probably go ahead, and we're hearing that the election board could include Ekuru Aukot, who polled less than 1% the first time round. So this becomes a big joke, doesn't it? Because it doesn't become an election, does it, Agnes?
Absolutely. It's chaotic, and it's very unfortunate just listening to both Maalim and Honorable Kimani that we're talking about us and them. I mean, I just want to clearly say there is no us and them. It's a country. And Kenya right now, it's a laughingstock, you know? I mean, everybody says in the long term for the democratic process to take place, this is a positive, the movements we're seeing in Kenya is positive, but certainly not as chaotic. And the people who are in leadership position must bring this to order. And I highly doubt the election will take place on the 26th of October because, you know, the withdrawal of Honorable Raila Odinga, as he had been requested by the President Uhuru Kenyatta, has thrown us into a chaotic situation. To be honest with you, I do not know what the future holds for the country. I think peace-loving Kenyans are watching closely, and hopefully that the politicians can just get mature and have a conversation and guide us to the way forward.
Let me ask you, Kimani, would you be comfortable with an election where your candidate runs against a guy who less than 1% of Kenyans actually support? Would you consider that a proper election?
Let me first, because I'm in Nairobi, bring you up to speed on what is happening. This morning, the High Court in Nairobi did rule that, in fact, all the other 8 candidates who are on the ballot are at liberty to be on the ballot, and therefore I'm looking at a situation where probably IEBC will allow, because the court did rule that there is no reason at all to disallow any of the candidates who ran in the August 8th
But not a single one of them has the power or appeal of Odinga, right? Realistically speaking, when we look at the political system and we look at who has political momentum, not a single one of them has the power of Odinga. So essentially, you have Kenyatta, who's a Goliath versus a bunch of political midgets in an election. How is that an election?
Let me say our country, unlike countries like Australia, our country, voting and being on the ballot paper is not compulsory for anybody. And therefore, it is within, and Raila Odinga himself has said, it is within his democratic right to choose whether to go into an election or not. To begin with, the August 8th election, for us, we have maintained that we want their issues to do with even the nullification of the Supreme Court, which we have said we will revisit after we are done with the election, because there were issues even within the petition itself and how documents were handled at the registrar of the Supreme Court in terms of the report that the judges relied on. But let me say this in regard to what Gitao is saying, that we are becoming a laughingstock. Yes, indeed, we would become a laughingstock if we were to abrogate our constitution and put it aside and start negotiating for what they want, the caretaker governments they want, and those other means that will be unconstitutional of getting into government other than through the ballot. I would have encouraged, and I was looking forward to a situation where we will, on the ballot, humiliate Raila Odinga and the NASA coalition by proving to him and proving to the world that indeed President Uhuru Kenyatta won with an overwhelming majority of over 8.2 million votes. 1.5 million votes above what Raila Odinga had. Okay. I was looking forward to a situation on the 26th of October where probably would have had a margin of another 3 to 4 million votes.
Fair enough, and it's not happening now. Farah Maalim, let me ask you about the responsibility that Raila has when it comes to what people might do on the streets. 2007 is a ghost that hangs over the memory of the country. On the continent and around the world, people look at the country. More than 1,200 people were killed. It descended from political violence into ethnic violence. It got terrible and atrocious and disgusting. Doesn't Raila, even if you truly believe he's technically right in this conversation, if you believe that there are systemic issues here, doesn't he have a responsibility to consider that the boycott might lead to violence?
Let me tell you something. To be fair to everybody and to be fair to some of the founding fathers of this country, other than the presidential elections, the last time we had free and fair elections is in 1974, when this was still under the first Kenyatta. The first Kenyatta, who was the first president of this country, did not accommodate anybody running against him. He was always a sole candidate for the presidency. But for every other seat, he never allowed any rigging to take place. We have had an impunity of rigging from the first one, which was under Moi in 79, until the last one yesterday. So what Raila says is that, look, what's the point of having a democracy if we cannot have it free, fair, credible, and transparent? If there's every time going to be one form of rigging or the other, Everybody knows who won in 2007. I come from the northeastern part of this country. I'm not from Central Province, and I'm not from the lakeside where Raila comes from. And I'm looking at this thing from a very impartial, non-partisan, but straight in a patriotic manner. We need to bring a close to the impunities in electoral rigging in this country and in the continent of Africa, all of it. So it's only because of that. I think this decision right now to boycott this election is not geared towards any violence. It's geared, and by the way, when there was violence in 2007, hang on a minute. When we had a violence in 2007, not Raila or Kibaki or anybody else was there as been seen as culpable. The people who were seen that time and who basically later on were vindicated by the courts, the international ICC, were not any of them. The point I'm trying to tell you is that the country deserves, Kenyans deserve a free, fair, and credible elections. I think Uhuru has the advantage of incumbency, and it's possible that he's going to win the elections. Why not just have a free, fair, credible, and transparent elections? And
that's the point at which you
all
disagree.
Once.
Certainly, Farah. Kimani Ichung'wah, Farah Maalim, and Agnes Gitau. Unfortunately, I've got to move on. But it's been a pleasure listening to all your opinions. Good to get your opinions, your passion. It's a testing time for Kenya. I appreciate you all coming on the Newsmakers to join us for the conversation. Thanks so much. Coming up on the program, has the White House inadvertently sided with India over the debate on Kashmir? And Spain's Prime Minister threatens Catalonia with direct rule. Could this be the end of the region's autonomy?
We propose Parliament suspend the effects of the Declaration of Independence to undertake talks in the coming weeks, without which it is impossible to reach an agreed solution. We strongly believe that the moment requires not only to allay the tensions, but above all to make a clear compromise to advance the demands made by Catalan people.
Catalonia's president tried to offer an olive branch to Madrid after voters backed independence in a non-binding referendum. But Spain responded with a stick. Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy put Catalonia on notice, saying if a date is set to break away from his country, direct rule will be imposed. The threat to end Catalan autonomy was issued after the federal government said it could order the arrest of more than 700 Catalan officials, including mayors and other politicians. Well, joining me now from Barcelona is Albert Royo. He's the Secretary General of the Public Diplomacy Council of Catalonia. Albert, good to have you on the program. So there was this signed and then suspended when it comes to the Declaration of Independence. Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy is capitalizing on that and saying, hey, you guys need to tell us whether you declared independence or not. So would you accept that with the declaration from Puigdemont and then the suspension, there's been confusion and it's played into the hands of Madrid?
Listen, yesterday President Puigdemont declared independence in the Catalan parliament, and subsequently he frozen that declaration. And that's a gesture towards Madrid and towards the international community, because that was a request coming from several international counterparts to de-escalate this tension, to de-escalate this crisis, and to open a door to negotiation. So we have done what we were requested by the international counterparts, and now we urge Madrid to move forward and also to de-escalate this crisis and propose something.
Are you prepared for them to invoke Article 155 or to start that process, which would mean you lose everything that you have right now? Never mind not getting independence, you lose even the autonomy you have now.
Listen, I'm sure that Madrid knows, the government of Spain knows, that if such a measure is taken, the people of Catalonia will take to the streets and will defend its institutions and the leaders of these institutions. So they should watch out in what they are doing right now or in the coming weeks. People will defend the political will. People democratically express their political will in that referendum, and that should be respected in a democratic system.
Madrid still doesn't consider that referendum valid. It considers it an illegal vote. Let me ask you, if you go ahead and declare independence without withdrawing it or without suspending it, who's going to recognize you? Because last week, nobody signaled that they were willing to recognize you as a sovereign state.
Well, we have studied other self-determination processes, and it's always the same. In the case, for instance, of the Baltic republics, in the case of Slovenia, Croatia, just a few days ahead of the proclamation of independence, they got very negative messages coming from the State Department in the United States or from the European Union. So we understand the international community is very pragmatic. No, the international community is citing Madrid, but once you have a new reality, the same pragmatism will encourage the international counterparts to start recognizing Catalonia. It may take a while. For instance, in the case of Slovenia, it took 6 months for them to obtain the first official recognition from a third party, but in the end, it will come, I'm sure.
Yeah, you say pragmatism. What's interesting is that last week, from a lot of the European countries and other countries, on the one hand, they were supporting the sovereignty of Spain, and they were showing their support of Prime Minister Rajoy's government. And on the other hand, their only real support for you was to condemn the police brutality of the national police against what the national police did to protesters and voters, right? 1 week on, they haven't beat up any more protesters. In many ways, the police brutality is forgotten. So isn't Rajoy's position strengthened now that the international community doesn't really have anything tangible to condemn on the Spanish side as they did last week when we saw those pictures of the police beating up innocent people?
I wouldn't say so. I would say that the Catalan position has been strengthened after yesterday's gesture to freeze this declaration of independence. Now it's time for Madrid to move forward and try to de-escalate. But nevertheless, I would like also to underline that there are still 10,000 military policemen here, docked in the harbor of Barcelona and the harbor of Tarragona, ready to act. And they are quite scary, I have to tell you. Mm-hmm. So we would need Madrid to go forward and at least withdraw these forces.
Okay, and yeah, you have the Mossos de Esquadra, and I remember I was there last week. You have the people who very much respect the local police, and the others were seen as an outside occupational force. But again, there haven't been any incidents in the past week. We hope there aren't any more incidents. Let's move this forward. You say President Puigdemont has opened the door to negotiations, right? But what sort of negotiations? Because from the Spanish government's perspective, if you want to negotiate, that means you're willing to negotiate whether you become independent or not. So are you still willing to accept some sort of deal short of independence? Some sort of deal where you get maybe a sweeter economic deal, where you get more investment in education and so on, short of independence?
Listen, yesterday I think the President Puigdemont was very clear. We are open to negotiations with no conditions. And I would expect the government of Madrid to accept the same thing, and even to accept mediation and international mediation in order to approach the two stances. Nevertheless, it's clear that there has been a democratic mandate for independence, and we have to take that into account. But we are offering the possibility to start negotiations with no conditions right now.
If they open criminal proceedings, would that hurt you or help your cause? Because there's one interpretation that if they start arresting all the leadership of the Catalan government, that's fantastic for your movement because all the international solidarity will be on your side.
Listen, for 7 years, we haven't received a single love letter from Madrid. Just threats, just boycotts, and just police officials beating our innocent people who are lining up to cast their vote. So never a positive proposal coming from Madrid. I really think that was completely counterproductive. That fueled the conflict, that helped the pro-independence campaign, the pro-independence camp. So I expect that if they keep on doing this kind of, taking this kind of measures, they will help us fueling this pro-independence campaign. That is clear.
Albert Royo, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
It was a day defined by an attraction of opposites. Police in Gothenburg were prepared. This wasn't the first time they had been ordered to keep two groups with a mutual distaste for each other separated. The far-right Nordic resistance movement chose the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur to rally for its vision of an ethnically pure Sweden. But their march, dubbed a revolt against traitors, was met with even greater resistance.
Thousands have come to join the opposing protests. Left-wing groups organized the large turnout to send a clear message. Intolerance is not a value of mainstream Swedish society.
After a few scuffles and dozens of arrests, the far-right protesters were stopped by police. We asked to speak with the Nordic resistance movement to no avail. Catalan was at the protest. He's a social welfare activist who regularly attends far-right rallies to stop them from being able to voice their message.
We don't want to have Nazi in our country. We don't want to have people who hate another people just because the color or the race or what he believes in. No, we just want to be so many so we can show them we are 10 times more than you guys.
While he says he doesn't advocate violence, he told me he's fought far-right activists on the streets.
If I don't fight, yeah, the right side coming to take over. So the only possibility is to stay there and fight. Not fight, but like show them you have no chance because we are the people, you are just some Nazi.
Catalan's convictions are in line with the Antifa, or anti-fascist movement. It originated in Germany in 1932 to provide a far-left counter to the fast-rising Nazi party. It's now an international movement. And in Sweden, where the far-right has gained ground, Antifa's members turn out in droves.
This is a salute from the Swedish youth to our European brothers and sisters.
Europa tillhör oss.
The far-right Sweden Democrats surged from a fringe party to the country's third largest in 2014. It has roots in the white supremacist movement. With an election less than a year away, those on the left will have to rally their political base if they are to drown out the voices of the far right, not only on the streets, but in the halls of power. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers in Gothenburg.
The U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis has complicated a major diplomatic dispute over infrastructure. At issue is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. It's a massive system of transportation and energy projects which runs through Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Mattis upset Pakistan by implying the plan threatens Indian sovereignty. China now fears the comment could upend their investment worth tens of billions of dollars. Shoaib Hassan has more.
Taking sides in what's seen as one of the world's most contentious relationships, U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis has sidelined Pakistan in an ongoing dispute with India over the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC.
I believe the Secretary...
General Mattis said it passes through disputed territory, essentially rubber-stamping India's opposition to the controversial plan. The disputed territory is part of the unresolved Kashmir conflict, dating back to the partition of the Indian subcontinent. CPEC begins by passing through a mountain range that India says is part of that territory. The corridor is the first part of China's grand One Belt, One Road project. It aims to link China to the Middle East and Central Asia through a series of railroads and road links. Beijing says it's purely to encourage trade. but India says it's part of a plan to encircle it and curtail its growing influence with help from Pakistan.
समंदर हो या सीमा हो, साइबर हो या स्पेस हो, हर प्रकार की सुरक्षा भारत अपने आप में सामर्थ्यवान है.
Pakistani officials insist that India and the US are not just opposing the project verbally, but actively supporting militant groups to destabilize it through Afghanistan. And that accusation has got support from a surprise source. Former Afghan President Hamid Karzai, who accused the US of supporting Daesh in his country.
Daesh emerged first in Nangarhar, in Shinwar district of Nangarhar. The United States has a huge base in Jalalabad, in the central provincial capital of Nangarhar. They kept watching it, and from the very beginning, when you are there with the intention to fight it, but then a deadly terroristic organization like that emerges, and you watch it and do nothing. In addition to that, more than that, people reported that helicopters were coming and dropping supplies.
Karzai made the allegations during an exclusive interview with the Newsmakers, and last week doubled down on those claims in an interview broadcast on Russian television. That's likely to please China and Pakistan's leadership and lend credibility to what many have been calling half-truths or conspiracy theories. America's latest stance has also fueled speculation that a new proxy war may be launched in the region. And if that's true, three of the opposing sides are neighbors and nuclear powers. Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from New Delhi by Tilak Devashir. He is the Indian government's former cabinet secretary. In Islamabad, Asim Sajjad. He's a member of the left-wing Awami Workers' Party. He is also a professor of political economy at Quaid-e-Azam University. And in Washington, D.C., Andrew Small, senior transatlantic fellow at the German Marshall Fund. Thank you very much for joining us. Andrew Small, let me begin with you. Is the U.S. threatened by CPEC?
No, I think one can slightly overread the statement from Secretary Mattis the other week. I'm not sure that necessarily represents a consolidated view on the part of the US government. I think it would have been hard to imagine him making this statement without the fact that he'd recently come back from a trip to India. I think the US does share a number of India's concerns about CPEC and the Belt and Road Initiative, but in many respects, I think there's parts of the US government that are relatively sympathetic to Chinese investments in Pakistan as well and would like to see a lot of them succeed. I certainly don't think the US is overly concerned about the security role that China has there, Gwadar or these elements. I think there's a more balanced view than might be reflected just by looking at the Mattis statement.
Asim Sajjad, did Mattis describe policy or did he just misspeak?
It's difficult to say these days with an administration that seems to be all over the place. But, you know, I sort of tend to agree that I don't think that Washington has, as a matter of policy, is opposed to CPEC or is hell-bent on sort of blocking the way. I think that this is there's a little bit of posturing. There's probably a bit of, you know, let's keep the Modi government sort of happy. But I don't see, again, the Americans either hoping or actually even practically having any expectation that they can either stop China from influencing or investing in Pakistan, or that such a policy would even be beneficial.
Tilak Devashir, tell me why India might feel encircled by this deal.
Well, we don't feel encircled because of CPEC, but because CPEC, the route of CPEC goes through territory which we consider our own. And as the government has said, it's an illegal occupation of Pakistan. Therefore, we made our position very clear, both to Pakistan as well as to China. So it's not encircling, if CPEC doesn't encircle us, but yes, it passes through territory which we consider our own, and we made that known.
Okay, so Asim Sajjad, from the Indian perspective, Pakistan and China are, I guess, establishing facts on the ground on disputed territory, or to many Indians it's not disputed, it's theirs. Is this going to get Kashmir to flare up again?
Well, I mean, you know, you can find 1,000,001 ways to get Kashmir to flare up, or for Pak-Indo ties to flare up. I think that, look, the reality of the situation is that if CPEC, or frankly any other regional cooperation agreement, is to succeed, there's just no chance of it. We can't like live in Cold War binaries anymore that, you know, India and Pakistan are always going to be on the other side of a great power divide. I think that the reality is that these sorts of projects, if they are to succeed, are going to involve, you know, sort of multilateral cooperation. I can't see Pakistan and China doing business and India having nothing to do with it. I mean, I think that one way or the other, that is a that's a non-starter. And I think that's probably, I see the way forward being all of them having some kind of shared initiative, or none at all.
Andrew Small, for those who see something like this and go, okay, so it's Abbasi and Xi Jinping versus Trump and Modi, it's Pakistan and China versus India and the US, is that binary inaccurate?
I think it's inaccurate. I think there are real concerns on the part of a number of the parties to ensure that these kinds of blocs don't form. I think Pakistan is still keen to fix its relationship with the US. I don't think China wants to see a bad US-Pakistan relationship. At the same time, the dynamics are moving in a direction where there are elements of bloc-type behavior that I think were not there a few years ago. I think you see in the tensions between US and Pakistan, US and China, where the China-India relationship is going, that even when I think none of the sides want things to be heading in this sort of direction, I think there are pressures that are tilting it a little bit closer to sort of hardening lines that were previously somewhat softer. At the same time, I think there's enough of a premium that all of the sides place on not getting into this kind of zero-sum politics in the region, which would be so pernicious to all sides' interests, that I think there'll still be an attempt to keep a lid on that.
Yeah. Tilak Devashir, if everything goes according to plan, the power plants, the industrial zones, the economic zones, the roads and the bridges and the ports and so on, which includes it being built in territory that India believes is its own, what would India actually do in response to that if it all just goes ahead?
You know, I have been looking at the China-Pakistan economic corridor pretty closely. And it sounds very good on paper. It's a big opportunity for Pakistan. But the way it's being built in Pakistan is a game changer, or as if the keys of heaven have opened up for Pakistan. I'm not quite sure it is there. It's an opportunity that Pakistan has to capitalize upon. So I'm not unduly worried about that. India needs to react right now on the way CPEC is developing. Even these special economic zones, which are being supposed to be built, we don't know the details. The problem with CPEC is that the details are not known. It's very, very opaque. Even the governor of the State Bank of Pakistan had to admit that he didn't know how much was equity and how much was debt of these $46 billion that was coming in. So I don't think so in India we're very worried right now, or what are these projects which are going to be passing through territory that we consider our own. We'll just wait and watch to see what actually comes out of it on the ground. And if I can just go back for a minute, if you allow me, to your previous question on China, India and Chinese trade is touching almost $100 billion.
Right.
So I don't see it in any camps that, you know, China and Pakistan on one side or India and the US on the other. I think we have a very good multilateral diplomacy going on.
Yeah. Asim Sajjad, is it being billed as this magic solution to Pakistan's problems economically and so on? Because that was suggested by Tilak. Is that how people in Pakistan see it?
Well, I mean, I actually agree that there's very little public disclosure. There is sort of like this sort of magic wand-like sort of at least depiction that you know, frankly, both Pakistan and the Chinese government are interested in putting out there. There is very little actual information. I think that you know, the problem I have with anything to do with CPEC or any such project is actually whether or not, you know, at the level of states and at the level of this macro sort of perspective that we often adopt, whether we're actually able to capture the real impacts on the ground. Just because $50 billion is coming in doesn't necessarily mean that it's all, you know, milk and honey. I mean, I think that's really what we wait to see. And I think that, you know, internal conflicts within Pakistan would be a bigger concern for me than whether India or XYZ other countries is bothered by it.
Yeah, and in a couple of minutes I want to ask you about the internal conflicts, but I just want to stay on this point for a moment, Asim, because the Pakistani government has said this will usher in an era of unprecedented progress and prosperity. Forbes, on the other hand, had a piece that just came out saying the China-Pakistan economic corridor's biggest threat isn't India, it's corruption. And they speak of long delays and cost overruns and so forth. So is there the prospect of Pakistan getting bogged down in a big mess that was a beautiful idea, but because of corruption, it might turn out to be counterproductive?
Well, I mean, corruption, I don't know. I mean, I think that as you know, anybody who's observing Pakistan these days knows that, as always, the civil-military fault line is a big one. So, you know, political uncertainty, definitely. I think that before, you know, when the CPEC plan was announced, there was a lot of disquiet amongst what we call the smaller nationalities in Pakistan about whether or not the benefits would be equally shared, or in fact it would be a Punjab-centric project. There's ecological issues, there's different sort of concerns, and those concerns will continue to be voiced. And I think the extent to which any kind of consensus, I mean, if this is the great game playing out again, then of course the people of the region may not benefit. And I think that's what supposedly development projects should be doing, is benefiting the people, rather than it be a calculus of whether states approve of these projects or not.
Yeah, Andrew Small, to take the great game metaphor and expand it, is China injecting itself into the great game? And might that be a reason why the United States is getting uncomfortable, because the US would like to be the indispensable power in the region?
I mean, I'm not sure this is a game that the US is exactly playing at the moment. The challenge for the US is more the fact that China is really stepping in on these big infrastructure projects, these big investment packages and things, in a way that the US really hasn't been doing, and a number of the multilateral institutions haven't been doing in the region for some time. There is a huge infrastructure deficit. There are real needs for a lot of these investments. There are, of course, serious questions about the way that China is going about doing it. There are a number of the issues that have been highlighted already: environmental, the opacity of the financing, debt burdens, all of these questions. But the need is there, and I think, in fact, the fact that China is stepping in to do this on such a grand scale is putting a certain amount of pressure on the US and others to rethink whether they should really be more serious actors in this space again, and whether the kind of Sino-centric version, if there are concerns about it, whether it might not be helpful to provide some good alternatives for countries themselves. The US had actually been asking China over a number of years to increase its investments in Pakistan, to step in and occupy this role. So I don't think it's purely operating in competitive terms. The question is more, what is the impact really going to be on some of the security dynamics in the countries, on the economic situation of these countries?
Yeah. Tilak, talking about the internal dynamics of Pakistan, just across the border from where you are in India, there's the rest of province of Baluchistan. This deal, CPEC, might be a huge economic game changer when it comes to Baluchistan and its economy, massive port and so on. Tell me how India views the potential for things to go right or the potential for it to go wrong in Baluchistan.
You know, the reports that are coming out in the Pakistani media about Balochistan are not very encouraging. And I'm sure Sajjad would agree with this. Gwadar and the development of the routes coming out from CPEC have been planned without taking into account the wishes of the Baloch people. Gwadar is going to become a 5 million city, 5 million people inhabiting that. And the Baloch, the entire population of Balochistan, of the Baloch in Balochistan, is roughly the same. They feel they will become red Indianized, marginalized in their own country. There will be other people coming in from outside, from different parts of Pakistan and the Chinese, and who will just outvote them every time. Likewise, in the routes on the various projects that have been built are mostly in Punjab and in Sindh, and very few in Balochistan. So the Baloch are wondering that, look, Gwadar is our port, this is our land, what are we getting out of it? I'll give you one example of water. Gwadar faces a very serious drinking water problem. In fact, anecdotal evidence is that whenever burglars raid a house, they pick up water containers rather than anything else. And nothing has been done over these past, even the decades of the last couple of years, to help the people of Gwadar get drinking water.
Right.
So I'm not so sure that it is going to be a huge boost for Balochistan.
Yeah, Asim, how do you see it? Balochistan, is there going to be a problem down the road here?
Well, I mean, I think that so-called security concerns, the Chinese government has made these clear to the Pakistani authorities even before the project was announced. And, you know, Balochistan has been a hotbed of conflict for some time. Unfortunately, which I think the irony of this conversation is that that's precisely what the Pakistani state tends to react to, is sort of what they consider Indian meddling. And that then allows for the real long-standing historical grievances of whether it be the Baloch or any other disaffected group in Pakistan to be depicted as, you know, some sort of foreign hand playing out. And I think that is the sort of context from which we need to emerge if, as I said, you know, development is supposed to benefit the people. And if it doesn't, then I think it suffers a legitimacy crisis, irrespective of whether states, you know, perceive those certain projects to be beneficial or not.
Tilak Devashir, Asim Sajjad, and Andrew Small, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Gupta. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, we look at the future of the Iran nuclear deal as US President Donald Trump decides whether or not to renew it. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.